Once upon a time, there was a pro football team in St. Louis. Well, actually, two of them. There's still fond memories of both of them, of course, but one of them seems to have captured the hearts of a lot of fans. That team was called the Football Cardinals. There's still a fan club in town, by the way, for the Big Red. All these years after Bill Bidwell moved the team to Arizona. Remember the Cardiac Cardinals? We still talk a lot about those teams with Jim Hart and Mel Gray and Dan Deardorff and Jackie Smith and Jim Bakken and Jim Otis and Terry Metcalf and many others. They made May Sundays very special for us. Some of those teams also played some really good football. One of the special yet unheralded players was defensive tackle Bob Rowe. He was a second-round draft choice out of Western Michigan. He started one game as a rookie, but then started 110 of the next 111 games. At 6'4", 270, he was in the backfield a lot. He was super quick off the ball. He was a handful for opposing offensive linemen and into the face of the opposing quarterbacks. But research has shown, by the way, sacks were not an official statistic in those days. But a lot of research has shown that Bob had 53 and a half sacks in his career. That's a big total. 25 in his last 3 seasons. Also, kickers did not like to look over the line and see Bob Rowe coming at him. He blocked 10 kicks in his career, including 3 in one game against the Baltimore Colts. He was named the AP Defensive Player of the Week after that game. He also recovered 9 fumbles in his career. Defensive tackles do a lot of tough work in the trenches, and too often they don't get recognized for the job they do. So tonight we're proud of doing this and welcome Bob Rowe into the St. Louis Sports Hall of Fame. Come on up here, Bobby.
My wife asked me if I was going to jump up on the stage.
Well, you noticed when Ron was talking about all those names, they were all offensive players.
You know, I thought I was praying and I get in here maybe before posthumously being honored. But no, it's a thrill to be honored.
And Ron was mentioning the sacks and those numbers unofficially back then, but not only is 53 and a half sacks, let's remember he played only 9 seasons, but for a defensive tackle, that's a lot of sacks. Even guys today, there's not, maybe beyond Aaron Donald, there's not too many defensive tackles that get a lot of sacks, and those that do a lot of times have great guys on either side. So what was it that enabled you not only to get the sacks, but block field goals, recover fumbles, and I should add, even returned an interception for a touchdown during your career?
I was blessed all through my athletic career with quickness off the ball. In 5 yards, I was as quick as any running back in the NFL. And 6, no, but 5 I could do. All right, and it allowed me to get to the offensive guard or the center, whatever it was, quicker. And so it was just some quickness and a lot of luck. And one of the guys that is sitting over here is also a big help and let me do that.
And that's Ron Yankowski.
Ron Yankowski, yep. He and I played together side by side for about 7 years. So yeah, you need a team to win, and we may not won a lot, but we had some great ball players.
Tell the story about how you almost got traded to the Lions and what you did to basically scotch the deal.
I got wind from a friend of mine that was traded to the Detroit Lions. We were going to play Buffalo in an exhibition game. And when we went up there, I had the good fortune. Irv Goody had been traded up there a couple of years earlier, and it allowed me to play across from Irv, and he and I knew each other like a book. And I was able to nail OJ in the backfield 2 or 3 times. I had a couple sacks, and I never went to Detroit. I stayed in St. Louis.
And Ron mentioned, and you mentioned, there weren't a lot of good teams, but there were some pretty good ones. And of course, your last 2 seasons with the Big Red were when Don Coryell was the head coach. What was it that you think, and you were on the other side of the ball, of course, but you had to go against all those offensive guys in practice. What was it that was so special about Don Coryell, and why do you think he was so successful? Coming from, a lot of guys, not a lot, but college coaches sometimes when they come to the NFL don't do well. He obviously did.
Couple things. He brought a whole new philosophy to the NFL. Everybody talks about Air Coryell, and that, quite candidly, is what he brought to us. Plus, he was a player's coach. And when I say player's coach, I don't mean somebody that just bent over to make us happy. I'm talking about somebody that came, when he asked you to do something, there was logic behind it. There was a reason to do it. It just wasn't, let's try this. It had been tested and laid on us. And besides that, he was just one hell of a coach. He was a good man and very knowledgeable, and we miss him.
Two playoff seasons, of course, when he was there. And I know you mentioned, and others have talked about some great quotes that Don Coryell talked about the defense, where it was Roger Worley and who else? Maybe Roger was there. And I think there was a story when you were playing the Giants one year that Coryell made a comment to the media that there's only two guys on this defense that could play for the Giants. And so one practice one day, the players came out to practice with decals on their helmet that said Roger and me.
Yeah, the one thing about Coryell, you couldn't have thin skin because he was an offensive coach, which meant 99.9% of his thought process was offense. And then, there were those guys over there that I really don't know what the hell they do, but, they usually will get us. We need them, let's put it that way. We have to have them because they're going to get us the ball back. But so we can go back out and score again. It was fun. Roger Worley, who by far was one of the greatest players ever to play here, and me.
It's always said that football is a game that's really won in the trenches. The quarterbacks get the accolades, the receivers and the running backs and all those guys, but in the trenches is really where the game is played. And those Cardinal teams, and you went up against some guys on those, you had two sets of pretty amazing offensive lines, didn't you, in your career here?
I was fortunate enough, when I came here in '67, think about that, folks, that's 52 years ago. 1967, our offensive line was Ernie McMillan, it was Kenny Gray, it was Bob DeMarco, Irv Goody, and Bob Reynolds, and then number 81, Jackie Smith. And that whole team had gone to the Pro Bowl, had been all pro. I mean, they were one of the greatest offensive lines in the NFL. And then when they left, obviously, the rest of the story, we ended up getting Dan, Conrad, Tommy Banks, Bobby Young, and Roger Finney, and of course, Jackie Smith. So yes, I was blessed to play, if you want to think about it, I was blessed to play with the four Cardinals that are in the Hall of Fame. Larry Wilson, Jackie, Dan, and Roger. And I got their autographs at home. And
pretty good company. Pretty good company. Defensive linemen or offensive linemen, for that matter, are always a lot of times asked, who was the toughest player that you ever had to play against? And aside from guys on other teams, you mentioned Bob Young. I would suspect that he might have been the toughest you ever went up against. And in fact, there's a story there in terms of the way your career ended.
Bobby Young came to us via Houston. And then he got he had lifted weights obviously all his life, but then he got serious about it. And as some of you know, maybe he was named the strongest man in the world, I guess, when that show was on. And I had the good fortune to go against him every day. Every day. And he was excellent. And he and I had worked out a system because I'd been around a long time. He'd been around a long time. Why are we going to go out and practice and go live against each other and, possibly hurt each other? It's stupid. So we worked out a system where he'd go hard, I'd go hard, he'd go hard, I'd go hard. We got crossed up. We both went hard. And I felt my back pop. I ruptured a disc in my back and went right to my knees. That was it. I was done. My career was ended, and it's just the way it goes. But yeah, he was one of the best, and there were several others in the league. But Bob was very good.
Before we let you go, there's one story that I have to tell, and I've saved, I think, one of the best for last, because when I spoke to Bob about doing this interview, he said, there's one thing you have to promise me. Don't mention that I was in the Pro Bowl in 1968, because it was listed in websites, it was listed even in the Cardinals media guide that Bob was in the Pro Bowl in 1968, his second season with the Cardinals after he hadn't started as a rookie. And he said to me, unless I had a concussion, I don't think that happened. So I said, okay, I won't mention it, but being a reporter, I was intrigued by this. And then he said the one magic word to me. He said, I've always wondered if it might be a guy named Dave Rowe, who was a defensive coordinator for a defensive tackle for several teams. They were both drafted in the second round in 1967, 10 picks apart. They were born 28 days apart. Do you care if I say it was 1945? And so I checked into it, and it turns out that Dave Rowe was the guy who was in the Pro Bowl. And so now, the website, many of you might look at it for football, profootballreference.com. I informed them. They made the correction. The Cardinals, interestingly, I always wondered, well, how could it be in their media guide? You're not going to put a guy in your media guide that wasn't in a Pro Bowl. Well, it turns out it wasn't even listed in the Cardinal media guide until 2005. And no one knows how it happened. I spoke to people with the Cardinals. We suspect that maybe someone saw it on Pro Football Reference, called the Cardinals and said, hey, you're not listing Bob Rowe in your media guide, and someone just listed it without checking. Well, it's not in their record book anymore. So it's a pretty interesting story. I did talk to Dave Rowe about all this and contacted him, and he did say what an excellent player Bob was, and that this recognition and this honor is very much deserved. He knew of Bob back then, of course. They were in the league the same time. But I want to ask you this. He also said, I might have been asked 1,000 times if I was Bob Rowe's brother. Were you ever asked if you were Dave Rowe's brother? Do you remember?
Wasn't that damn long ago?
That's too long ago.
No, occasionally you would. It was just odd to have, guys with the same name, same year, everything. And we played in the All-Star game, a couple All-Star games together. But yeah, he was a heck of a ball player. And every once in a while someone would say, are you and Dave, they could try and work it out. But no, yeah, he was a good ball player.
So the last question is, why did it mean so much to you to get it corrected and not have you, some people, because we come across people who say, oh, I played with the Cowboys this year, and it turns out they never did. What made you want to get that record corrected?
Any of you, and a lot of you have, obviously, it's the Sports Hall of Fame. But you also realize that when you receive an accolade, you receive it because you deserve it, not because it's somebody's mistake or it's something that happened inadvertently. And over the years, believe me, I tried to get it changed. I tried to get it altered. I even had my daughter and her husband work on it, try and get it erased, because it's just wrong. You don't accept accolades that you haven't deserved, and I didn't deserve it. And it always bothered me to be introduced occasionally as the guy that was in the Hall of Fame, went to the Pro Bowl in 1968. I hadn't even played a complete game, So it's just, when I got hurt, this is how my thought process went. When I got hurt, I ruptured a disc in my back. I had to retire. I had surgery. I never again went into the locker room. I never approached the locker room after that time because I didn't deserve to be in there. I was no more sweating. I wasn't working out. I wasn't, anyway. So that's why it meant a lot to me to have it fixed. And GI investigator over here took care of it for me.
Well, I think it's fair to say that Bob Rowe deserves, and we honor him by being enshrined tonight in the St. Louis Sports Hall of Fame.